Hey, it's Joe Parner here. Welcome to episode 116 of Insights. Thank you so much for being here. Hey, today we're taking a very unique deep dive into our relationship with uncertainty. We're going to go many levels deeper than I've ever been before. You see, we're going to be exploring the 5 levels of uncertainty through the lens of our behavioral profile. Oh my God, this sounds like a psychological symphony of good stuff. So if you haven't had a chance, if you can listen to episode 115, the episode just before this one, it's certainly not a prerequisite to today's insights. But in that episode, when you get a chance, we go deep. I spend the whole episode talking about the 5 levels of uncertainty. We're going to cover the 5 levels of uncertainty here briefly, but the deep dive is in 115. Here, we're going to extend that conversation. And I think I allude in episode 115 that there's a part 2 to that episode, which is this episode here. Which has taken a while to put together. Been a little bit busy, but here we are, and it's all good. And we're going to, as I said, take the lens of behavioral profiling. Now, for many of you who've been following my work for the last decade or two, you know that my expertise runs deep in the realm of behavioral profiling and the psychological specific area of emotional fitness, which of course is all about transforming people's relationship with uncertainty. And so, but what I thought I'd do today is combine the two. And the specific behavioral profiling model that I use, as I say, as many of you already know, of course, is extended DISC. Extended DISC is specifically a behavioral profiling tool with personality elements in it. And so, what this is a deep dive into the unconscious mind. Now, the whole realm of it just deserves a much more thorough conversation than that. And if you ever want to come along to any of my introductions, my free introductions to EDIS, then just subscribe to this channel, subscribe to this podcast, and that way you'll be guaranteed to be notified when the next free intro to eDisc is coming up. And also, we regularly run introductory events into the realm of emotional fitness as well, because I also run emotional fitness accreditation programs for business owners, for HR, for leaders, and for coaches and consultants. So if you want to dive into any of these areas, and if any of these messages from my podcast resonates with you, then subscribe so you can get those notifications, as I said, automatically. All right, so the 5 levels of uncertainty that we're going to extend upon from episode 115, I'm going to list what they are. I'm going to give you a little brief introduction to those 5 levels, and then we're going to take the macro lens of eDisc and specifically just simplify eDisc for the sake of this conversation. And we're going to look at how D energies, I energies, S energies, and C energies, how they individually, separately relate to the 5 levels of uncertainty. Now, that sounds like a lot, maybe because it is. And this might be one of those episodes you might want to listen to more than 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 or 4 times. Also, what I want to share with you is that as far as profiling goes, it is going to sound like I'm simplifying the profiling, because profiling is multi-layered and actually quite complex. All human behavior is complex. There's nothing as simple as just a labeling system that says you're a this or you're a that. That's certainly not what we do, and that's certainly not what I believe in. But I wanted to share with you here that to keep this simple, we're just going to isolate the D energy, the I energy, the S energy, and the C energy separately for the sake of just diving with clarity into how each of these lenses of thinking styles and decision-making styles and perception styles, how they relate to these individual 5 levels of uncertainty in a very unique way. Now, just a quick comment about profiling, just in general, is that less than 1% of the Australian population, and certainly less than 1% of the population generally, is dominant only in one of these energies. Most of us are dominant in 2 of these energies, or even up to 3 of these energies, and nobody is dominant in all 4. In fact, the creator of the DISC nomenclature is a fancy term for labeling system, the DISC labeling system. The guy that created that was Marston, Marston. And back in the 50s, when he actually created this labeling system, he actually was the creator of Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman is the only character, not real, who has domination in all 4 energies. So unless you're Wonder Woman, the chances are you're not dominant in all 4 energies. All right, so let's go back to current day. So here we are. We're going to look at the 5 levels of uncertainty first, and I'll list them here just very quickly. Brief description of each. As I said, there's a deep dive into those 5 levels in episode 115. And then over here, we'll continue the conversation and extend deeper, intricately into each of the 5 levels and how DISC energy relates to them. Now, you might be thinking, Well, if it's so multi-layered and complex, then why are we simplifying the DISC energy? Well, the reason being is because even though all of us have got a combination of a different sort of ratio of these energies, that pretty much for 99% of us, we're dominated by one energy over more than any other. So, and again, this is not a lesson in behavioral profiling because it deserves so much more than just a little chat here. And as I said, if feel welcome to come along to any of the free intro to EDIS trainings when they're on. I deliver those about 3 or 4 times a year. As I said, if you subscribe, you'll get automatic notification of when they're on. And in there, I go very, very deep into that. So the point I want to make is that most of us, even though we're a combination of these energies, we're dominated by one. Our psychological landscape is influenced by one particular energy more than any of the other combinations. So, to make this episode make sense, let's have a look at, first of all, the 5 levels of uncertainty that actually exist. And this is a model, one of my models, straight out of my emotional fitness formula. First level. So if we use the analogy of the pool, and in episode 115, I think that's what I do. We talk about the metaphor of the swimming pool. At the shallow end of the pool, as far as uncertainty goes, we've got what's known as variety. Variety is really ankle height water. It's pretty basic version of uncertainty. We barely feel it. Variety is just choosing a different restaurant to eat, maybe trying a different spice on your favorite food, or having a different pizza, or taking a different road to your office, or whatever it might be. Variety is very much ankle height, pretty easy, pretty basic sort of version of uncertainty. Then we start going into the deeper end of the shallow end of the pool, if that makes sense, where the water is up to our legs, maybe going up to our thighs. At that level there, we call that adventure. At that level of adventure is more like something a little bit more substantial. So for an example of adventure could be trying a new task a new potential interest that you've never tried before. It could be, journeying into the world of music and you've never played a musical instrument before, and you might go onto an adventurous experience of learning how to play the piano or whatever it might be. Adventure might also be traveling to some part of the world that whose language is not your language. So for me, for example, my primary language is English, and the sense of adventure might be to go to a country that speaks no English at all, as an example of adventure. So adventure and variety are still on the fun end of uncertainty. And then we have the middle of the pool where the water's really starting to get up to, sort of our tummies and up to our chests. And that's what I call challenge. And this is where the flavor of uncertainty begins to change from fun to hard. Challenge is something that literally expands our comfort zone. Sometimes challenges can be something that takes us right out of our comfort zone. Of course, the difference between getting out of our comfort zone and expanding our comfort zone, which I cover in one of my other episodes, I can't remember which one it is, but in one of my other podcasts, just very quickly, getting out of our comfort zone is where we're experiencing something with no reference points of experience. It is literally a brand new, unfamiliar experience. And then we've got expanding of comfort zone, which has got reference points of experience, but we're actually doing something that in that particular field that we're familiar with that we've never done before. So, for example, running is something that's very familiar to me and in my comfort zone. And when I run a marathon, that's an extension of that, or an expansion of that comfort zone. I'm doing something very difficult in an area where I have reference points of experience, but I'm pushing myself to another level and to another level and to another level. Does that make sense? Versus getting out of your comfort zone, which is I've never run anything in my life, and you've just started to run. That's getting out of your comfort zone because you've got no reference points around running. To give you that example, I hope that makes sense. So challenge is where we begin to either expand our comfort zone or get out of our comfort zone. So it's something that we find genuinely difficult. It's something that genuinely challenges us, challenges our thinking, challenges our physical limits, or challenges our mental limits, or whatever perceived limitations we have around ourselves. It's something that, as I said, it's where uncertainty begins to change flavor from fun to hard, and that's challenge. These first 3 levels, challenge, adventure, and variety, are versions of uncertainty that we consciously invite into our lives. And then we've got the 4th and 5th level. This is where we go to the deep end of the pool, because the next level is problems. And this is where the water starts to get up to our necks, kind of thing, where we're a little bit uncomfortable and maybe the water's floating just below our chins. And we need to look up to the sky in order to breathe. So a problem is where one of the big 3 gets hit, where we've either got a problem with our health or our finances or our relationships. And these are significant hits that we're taking, right? So these are problems that are not invited by us into our lives, but just happen. Now, there's more to it than that, of course. So there are certain philosophies that will say that, hey, you've invited that into your life and attracted that into your life. I get that. That's a whole other conversation beyond the scope of this particular episode. But the point I want to make is that problems generally arrive at our doorstep unwanted. So really levels 4 and 5. So problems, and then the last one is crisis, which I'll talk about in a second. Problems and crisis arrive at our doorstep where they're not invited into our home. Does that make sense? They're different. They come to us. And this is where difficulty and hard times it goes into the next level. So we start at the shallow end of the pool, which is all about fun, variety, and adventure is fun. Challenge is consciously choosing to do something difficult, and then problems and crisis is something that have come to us that we have to navigate. And so what we're going to do now in this episode is I want to now dive deep into using through the lens of DISC. Now I've got some notes that I've written here. If you're watching a video of this, I've got some notes in my journal that I'm going to read to you because there are a lot of details here. So this is why this episode might be worth listening to at least 2 or 3 times. So let's have a look. We're going to focus, first of all, on variety, the shallow end of the pool, and how each of the energies relates to variety. We're going to do each of these in order of intensity. So DISC in that order, because D energy is the most intense energy and C energy is the least intense energy. And we're going to go through variety, adventure, challenge, problems, and crisis, and look at how each of the energy types navigates these 5 levels of uncertainty. And I dare say you'll be, for many of you, for thousands of you who have done the EDIS profiling with me over the last 10, 15, 20 years, I dare say you'll be listening out for your profile being read out so you can see what insights I'm sharing with you here in terms of how to navigate any of these 5 levels of uncertainty. So let's begin with variety. The D energy. How does the D energy manage variety? What do they think of variety? Well, what I've written here in my notes is that they have a low need for variety because it's not the most leveraged way to win. The D energy is driven by the need to win. So what can actually happen is that they can see variety as a mere distraction. It's not something that is really important. And they get this need met anyway by healthy embracing of they have a very healthy attitude toward bringing on challenges, which we'll talk about when we get to challenges. So the D energy doesn't really rate variety all that high. It's not that important. And if it's a distraction away from their goal of winning that goal or achieving that ambition, then it's really just lowly rated, if that makes sense. On the other hand, rather, I energies rate variety really highly. They actually run their fuel, their psychic fuel, their energy tank runs off variety. For them, variety is a very high need. It's a very opposite of D energy. And so most I energies are addicted to some form of shiny thing syndrome. Now, shiny thing syndrome can be bad and can be good. If it's shiny thing syndrome, being distracted by things that take you away from what matters, and it's simply taking you away from your life, well, that's not a good shiny thing syndrome. But you can also have positive shiny thing syndromes, investing in time, energy, money, programs, coaches, mentors that will help you get to where you want to go. I know personally, I've got a library in the next room that I often sit in, and I might be reading this book and then I'll be reading that book and be distracted by that book. To me, that's shiny thing syndrome that helps me grow. So variety is something that I energies rate really high, and they really get energized by that. I've just written here, addicted to shiny thing syndrome and is easily distracted positively or negatively. This energy often has variety as its form of. So variety for an I energy is often experienced through fun and laughter, which is the I energy's favorite way to connect with people. Now, the I energy likes it is driven by the need to be liked, and connection is really, really huge for that. I mean, connection is important for all of us, obviously, but to an I energy, it's super sensitive. And the I energy superpower of connection and to diffuse tension is often driven by this need for variety. So variety for the I energy, love it. They love it. Now the S energy, of course, is driven by the need to be comfortable. The S energy is that carer, nurturing, warm sort of energy. Loves working with people, but with people one-on-one. Let me just reverse engineer this for a moment. So the D energy is the warrior hunter, driven by the need to win, relentlessly focused on facts and outcome and goals. The I energy is driven by the need to be liked. They are phenomenal connectors and calibrators of room, oozing in emotional and social intelligence, and are very aware of how to read the play socially in any situation. So that's the I. And the S energy is the mother archetype, the carer, nurturer, patient, warm, loving, trusting, uh, energy, if that makes sense. So the S energy is attitude toward variety, their relationship with variety. Well, I've written here a safe, ironically predictable way. So variety for the S energy is ironically because they're driven by comfort. Comfort is your primary driver. Is that the S energy views variety as a safe, ironically predictable way to meet the human need of uncertainty. Doesn't have a wide range of ways to do this, but variety can soon become another ritual or routine for the S energy, satisfying the need for comfort. So I'm just reading directly off my notes that I literally wrote this morning from my soul. Like, this is not from a book or sourced from anywhere. This is just based on my experience and knowledge over the years. So the S energy, ironically, can often will turn variety into a new form of routine, which is actually paradoxical, if that makes sense. So it's ironically a very safe way for them to dip their toe into the realm of uncertainty. So the S energy has got a very different way of looking at it. And remember that an S energy often will spend time in reflection to feel their way through situations, which we'll talk a bit more about in a tick when we get to the other levels of uncertainty. The C energy, of course, is the intellectual, the technician, the person who is able to solve complex problems, very detail orientated, fact driven, outcome focused like the D energy, except they are really, really detail orientated, quite microscopic sometimes in the way they see things. And the C energy's attitude toward variety, and I've written this here, is that intellectually encourages them in the form of having different ways of solving complex problems. So variety for them can be having different ways to navigate whatever data or issues or problems that are fact-based, numerically based, data-based that they're trying to solve. So as a pragmatist, which is what a C energy is, very much, they can sometimes finding different ways to solve a problem can be their version of fun. So that's how each of the energies relates to variety. Now we're going to go a little bit quicker now because I don't have to explain DIS and C energy again because I've already explained it here for the variety piece. Let's now move to the next level of uncertainty, which is, of course, adventure and how each of the energy styles relates to adventure. So D energy, remember, adventure is still the fun part of uncertainty. The D energy sees adventures. So adventures very quickly can turn into competitions for D energies. I love it. It's true. Embracing of adventure can turn into a competition. Now, the competition doesn't necessarily have to be between them and somebody else. It's often a competition with themselves to get better. If they're on a hiking adventure, they might refer to a time that someone did to climb this particular hill and will try to beat it, or they'll do it themselves a second or third time to see if they can beat their first time. I'm speaking generically here, but generally pretty accurate. So adventures can very quickly turn into competitions for D energies, whether that be with others or with themselves. What's the measuring stick? How does this compare to previous adventures or previous efforts to these adventures? Was it challenging enough? So that's the lens of the D energy as far as they relate to adventure. There's more to all this, of course, but this is a very good, solid introduction to all this sort of stuff. I energy and how they relate to adventure. Well, adventure for the I energy is a high-level version of variety. They love this, especially as it is an opportunity to connect in a variety of ways with others. So the adventure often will involve the sharing of experience and connection with others. And who they share this with is more important than the adventure itself. And that is very true for our energies. Who they share the adventure with is actually more important than the adventure itself. On the other hand, D energies view the adventure as a flavor of challenge. As I said, it turns very quickly into some kind of competition. I love it. The S energy, when it comes to adventure, the S energy, well, depends on what kind of adventure the S energy would say. The adventure for the S energy is more like an extension or an expansion of their comfort zone, which I spoke of briefly before at the introduction of this episode. So I'll just say that again. Adventure for the S energy is more like an extension or an expansion of their comfort zone rather than a complete adventure outside their comfort zone, if that makes sense. And it's an extension of their comfort zone. Anything outside the comfort zone has no reference points of experience, so the S energy is not a fan of that, as I explained earlier. Expansion of comfort zone, of course, builds and expands on previous reference points of experience, which is what the S energy prefers. The S energy much prefers expansion of comfort zone with known reference points versus getting out of the comfort zone with no reference points at all. Remembering, of course, the reason why this is true is because the primary driver of an S energy is driven by the need to be comfortable. And remember that the S energy's got the least functional or the least reactive relationship with uncertainty itself. They tend to be the slowest embraces of uncertainty out of all four energies. And then, as far as adventure goes, the C energy. How does the C energy view this? Well, they love it if it involves specialized knowledge, education, or learning. Being so factually detail driven, C energies get energized from embracing adventures which challenges or expands their thinking. And that's how the C energy views adventure. Love it. Okay, now we're going to move to challenge. So we're going from the fun flavored versions of uncertainty to the hard versions of uncertainty. Now we go into the challenge world. So how do each of the energies view challenge? Well, as you can probably appreciate and guess, the D energies thrive on challenge. They love it. What have I written here? I've written thrives, loves, adores, lights them up. As far as challenge goes, D energy will often be at their best with their backs up against the wall. They love that. They welcome it. They instantly embrace it. So challenge is something that really fuels the psychic energy of a D energy. It's just beautiful, especially if it's a challenge that they've consciously invited in or into their lives to go through an experience. The I energy and challenge. How does that work? Well, the I energy is also very quick at embracing. Remember that DI energies, both D and I energies are fast energies, so they tend to embrace things pretty quickly. And so the I energy is fast at embracing it. Their challenge is to see it through. That's their personal I energy's challenge, because when a challenge becomes too difficult for an I energy, sometimes they'll quit. A lot of the times they'll quit because there's something else shinier will take their attention. So I'll read through my notes here. I'm said here that I energies, as far as challenge goes, are fast at embracing it. Their challenge with challenge is to see it through. When a challenge becomes genuinely difficult, I energies have to dig deeper so they can maintain focus. That's really important. Having support and connection with others matters when doing something difficult for the I energy. So that's their way of viewing challenge. How does the S energy view challenge? The S energy rarely will proactively move toward a challenge. If challenge comes to them, they are slow to embrace it or to respond, as they often need time to reflect on how to embrace it. Once they are in, though, they are all in. So the S energy, with their attitude toward challenge, is a lot slower, and it needs to be something that is that they need to embrace it slowly through their reflection sort of strategy. Yeah, love it. I've said everything now. I think that's so accurate. C energy and how they relate to challenge. Well, I've written here anything that challenges their thinking previous to the adventure level, anything that challenges their thinking of previous ways of performing their role, especially if it can positively impact an outcome. C energies will embrace challenge. Now, remember that the C energy is driven by the need to be right as in precision and accuracy. And they're also heavily associated with certainty. If you're watching this on YouTube, forgive me for the shaking of the screen. That's my hands on my table and I'm getting too excited and I'm going to keep my hands off the table and my notes so I don't shake the screen. My apologies. Now, we've gone through the fun levels of uncertainty. We've gone through variety, adventure, which are the fun bits, and how DISC energies see that. So through the DISC energy lens, we've gone through challenge, which is where we go from fun to hard, and now we're about to move to problems and crisis. Problems is the fourth level, which is where things get fair dinkum. That's Australian terminology for really difficult. This is where a version of uncertainty has come to us now, and this is where things can sometimes get reasonably serious in terms of our focus. So problems, D energy, how do they view problems? Driven by the need to win, problems are tackled head on. Just as the bison runs toward any storm and through the storm so they can get to the other side faster, the D energy knows that this is the most efficient way forward. So when a problem comes, they don't escape it. The bison goes through the storm because it knows it's the fastest way to the other side. Now, D energies highly, highly value efficiency and effectiveness. So when a problem is at hand, very little time is wasted in trying to avoid it or go around it or try to ignore it. It's tackled head on, just like the bison does. The I energy when it comes to problems. The I energy can initially react in a scatterbrain kind of a way. But once they settle, they embrace it and work towards solution. They will often share what is going on with others, as this seems to diffuse the intensity of the problem at hand, and they don't feel as alone in navigating that problem. So they're not as quick to embrace the problem as D energies, but once they've settled, because what happens is, as I've already mentioned there in my notes, the I energy can become scatterbrained pretty quickly, defocuses. It's like tuning in to one station, then to another station, to another station, and all you get is confusion. So until that dust settles and they've got the right support and they can talk it through, then the I energy will embrace that problem pretty quickly as well, depending on how fast that first bit goes. S energies and problems. Well, they'll need to spend time definitely in reflection mode because they are what we call a period of time convincer. They need time to reflect and deflect and settle because they're highly, highly kinesthetic and sensitive. So SNHs will spend time in reflection mode. Drawing from the past, they will spend time pondering on what led to this problem. They will spend more time on the historical narrative that's contributed to this problem than they may have contributed to this rather than focusing on a way forward. Now, the S energy, of course, will start to focus on the way forward at some point, but initially they'll spend more time looking at any history or anything that's happened in the past that's linked to this problem. And sometimes an S energy can spend a bit too much time on what has already gone or what has already passed, rather than focusing on the solution taking us forward. The C energy when it comes to problems. And I get this, there's a lot of information here, it's content heavy. My apologies for that. But this is the nature of this particular symphony. It's rich in tune, rich in tones, rich in layers. So we're almost there. Hang in there. We're almost there because we've only got crisis to go after this. All right. So C energy when it comes to problems. A C energy takes a very practical view. They weigh up the pros and cons. And then they also look at what the controllables are versus the uncontrollables. Once they are clear on all of the above, they will simply get to work and find a solution. So they've got a very practical approach. They'll take their time to navigate and think pros, cons, controllables, uncontrollables. And once they're clear on what the pros and controllables are and the cons and uncontrollables are, they get to work. They just move forward. Just like the D energy, tackle it head on, except it takes longer for them to embrace a problem initially because they need to go through the thinking process to analyze which way to go. That's why they're a little bit slower on the uptake. But after they've got all that clarity, they move pretty quickly to solution. And of course, the deepest end of the pool, which is when we're lost, all contact with the bottom of the pool and we're sort of going under and over the water. This is, of course, the level of crisis. And this is where uncertainty gets pretty serious. And this is where, my definition of crisis is when something that we care about has come to an end beyond our control. And so this is, pretty difficult stuff. So how does a D energy view crisis? A crisis to them is if the problem is at hand is threatening, if the problem at hand, and this is in a crisis mode for D energy, if it's threatening their goals that matters to them, then this amplifies the crisis even more. In this case, they will move forward stoically and embrace it more as a challenge, driven by the need to win and defeat this crisis. They don't want to be defeated by that crisis. So because they're driven by the need to win and their relentless focus on achieving that goal, they will have a very stoic, harsh, hard, very directional approach to crisis, to as much control as they can possibly wield around it. And as we can appreciate, a lot of what happens in a crisis is beyond our control. So I energy with crisis. Well, they can initially be shattered. It can shatter them in a million pieces initially, a crisis. It depends how quickly the crisis is presented to them. But for an I energy, if it's all at once, it can shatter them into a million pieces. We'll sometimes overuse or inappropriately use humor to navigate through a crisis. On the outside, they look like they are handling it all okay, but on the inside, they are the direct opposite. So sometimes the I energy will use humor as a shield to protect them from further pain when it comes to crisis. And this is where sometimes you'll see them smiling through a problem when really inside they are being torn apart. So that's important to recognize if you're ever dealing with an I energy, going through some kind of extreme difficulty like some kind of crisis. S energy. S energy will recede back into their nest when it comes to a crisis. They will spend long periods of time receding and hiding. They may take some time to resurface depending on the poundage of the crisis. So in other words, how serious it is. But once they've come out of their nest and they've made a decision to work towards solution or to navigate or progress their way through it, they're on their way. But their initial reaction is one of hiding and protection and receding, which we can all respect and understand. The C energy, and this is the final bit to today's episode. My God, there's a lot here today. I should have broken this down to further parts. Anyway, in terms of, I should have made this into part 2 into episode 117. Doesn't matter. We're all here, 116. C energy, how do we relate to crisis through the lens of a C energy? Well, C energy will approach it in similar ways to problems. They'll take a practical approach and can seem quite calculated and smart with their approach. They will need space privately to realize and release or express pent-up emotions not shown to others. So the C energy does a lot of their venting emotionally in private when it comes to navigating a crisis. And of course, we must also realize that any form of crisis is racked and riddled with lots of emotion, and that emotion has to go somewhere. Not to be smart or with this, but the word emotion is about moving. Emotional flexibility is one of the 5 components of the emotional fitness formula. And one way of looking at emotional flexibility, one of many ways, is about allowing the emotion to move through you, to move through your body in all kinds of ways. And one of the ways that the C energy does that is in private, venting those and releasing those pent-up emotions privately. So there you have it. These are the 5 levels of uncertainty. Now, each of the DISC energies navigate each of these levels. I think it might be worth you coming back and listening to this again 2 or 3 times, because there's a lot of stuff here that I've shared. So I hope you found that really, really valuable. As I mentioned earlier, if this episode and other episodes that I've delivered here resonate with you, like genuinely resonate, feel welcome to subscribe. That way you'll receive free notifications of when we've got our next free event coming up, and also when we've got other events coming up, such as our accreditations in eDisc and also our accreditations in the emotional fitness space. And I also have the honor and pleasure still, after all this time, delivering these wonderful frameworks that make a massive difference to organizations and teams, and I adore that work too. So yes, as I said, just click subscribe and you'll automatically get notifications of these episodes coming out. Really appreciate you listening. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this of value, deep value, and look forward to reconnecting with you very soon on the next episode of Insights. Bye for now. I trust you enjoyed this latest episode of the Insights podcast and received great value. Please remember to subscribe and share your reviews, and I'll see you again very soon.